The dust of Redemption Creek settled thick on everything. The warped boardwalks, the false-fronted buildings, the souls of men who'd forgotten what clean air tasted like. It was August of 1882, and the heat pressed down like an iron on wet cloth, making the stench from the stockyards hang heavy in the streets. Marshal Colt Avery stood in the shadow of the jailhouse porch, watching the town prepare for what folks were calling the wedding of the season. His scarred face remained expressionless, but his gray eyes tracked every movement on Main Street with the intensity of a wolf studying sheep. The badge on his vest caught the afternoon sun, throwing light across the deep lines etched into his weathered face, lines that spoke of too many years, too many fights, and one loss that had carved deeper than any blade ever could. "Marshal," Deputy Tom Briggs called from inside. "You planning on standing there all day?" Colt didn't answer. His attention fixed on the Grand Hotel across the street, where Chinese lanterns were being strung between posts and tables draped in white cloth, luxuries that looked as out of place in Redemption Creek as a silk dress on a mule. Tomorrow, Royce Trenton would marry his bride from St. Louis, and half the territory would turn out to watch. Royce Trenton. The name tasted like bile in Colt's mouth. 3 years had passed since Emma died, but time hadn't dulled the edge of memory. His little sister, barely 19, swinging from a cottonwood tree outside town, accused of theft she didn't commit, and Royce Trenton, that smooth-talking gambler, counting his winnings at the poker table the very same night, his alibi solid as granite while Emma's real killer walked free. The law had failed Emma, the same law Colt had sworn to uphold. Marshal Avery? The soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. A young woman in traveling clothes stood before him, her face flushed from the heat. Pretty thing, with corn silk hair and eyes the color of sage honey. "Ma'am," he touched his hat brim. "I'm looking for the Grand Hotel? I seem to have gotten turned around." "Right there." He nodded across the street. "You here for the wedding?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Yes, I'm the bride, Celia Monroe." So this was her. Colt studied her with new interest, noting the expensive cut of her dress, the nervous way she twisted the strings of her reticule. She looked like a china doll someone had set down in the wrong store, fragile, lovely, and completely unaware of what she'd walked into. "Congratulations," he said, the word flat as week-old beer. "Thank you." She hesitated, seeming to sense something in his tone. "Have you known Mr. Trenton long enough?" Something flickered in her eyes, fear, uncertainty. Before he could read it, she'd composed herself again. "Well, I should go. He's expecting me." Colt watched her cross the street, her skirts raising small clouds of dust. She walked like someone heading to church, proper, contained, careful, not like someone rushing to meet the man she loved. The observation filed itself away in his mind alongside a dozen other details he'd gathered about Royce Trenton over the past months. Inside the jailhouse, Tom was cleaning his rifle. "Pretty little thing," he observed. "Trenton sure knows how to pick 'em. He knows how to use them, too." Colt muttered, checking the loads in his Colt .45. "What's that supposed to mean?" Colt didn't answer. He'd learned long ago that suspicions without proof were worth less than dust in this town. Royce Trenton had money, charm, and friends in high places. He owned half the businesses on Main Street and had the mayor's ear. A worn-out marshal with a reputation for drinking and a face full of scars didn't stand much chance against that. But tonight would be different. The plan had been forming for weeks, crystallizing as he'd watched the wedding preparations. Listened to the gossip about the beautiful bride from St. Louis. Celia Monroe came from money. Her father owned railroads back east. She was Trenton's ticket to respectability, to the kind of wealth that would make his gambling debts disappear and his past sins forgotten, unless someone reminded him that the past had a way of collecting its due. As darkness settled over Redemption Creek, Colt made his preparations. He packed his saddlebags with ammunition, dried beef, and medical supplies. His Winchester went into the saddle scabbard, along with extra blankets and a slicker. In the stable behind the jail, his horse. Caesar snorted as if sensing the tension in his master's movements. "Easy, boy," Colt murmured, checking the animal's shoes. "Long ride ahead." The storm clouds that had been building all day finally delivered on their promise near midnight. Rain hammered the tin roofs like bullets, and lightning split the sky in jagged tears. Perfect weather for what needed doing. Colt knew the layout of the Grand Hotel by heart, had studied it for weeks. The bridal suite was on the second floor, corner room with a balcony overlooking the alley. Trenton would be at his bachelor party at the Silver Dollar until dawn, drinking with the town's wealthy men and probably cheating them at cards. The bride would be alone. He moved through the storm like a shadow, water streaming from his black duster. The exterior stairs to the balcony were slick with rain, but he climbed them silent as smoke. The French doors were locked, but a thin blade between the frames solved that problem quick enough. The room smelled of lavender and wealth. In the bed, barely visible in the darkness, Celia Monroe slept with one hand tucked under her cheek like a child. Her wedding dress hung on a dressmaker's form in the corner, ghost white in the gloom. For a moment, Colt hesitated. She looked so young, so innocent. Nothing like the hard women who usually attach themselves to men like Trenton. But innocence hadn't saved Emma, and it wouldn't save this girl from the fate she'd chosen. He moved fast, one hand clamping over her mouth before she fully woke. Her eyes flew open, wild with terror in the lightning flashes. "Don't scream," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you, but I will if you make this difficult. Understand?" She nodded frantically, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "Get up, get dressed, traveling clothes, nothing fancy." He released her and stepped back, keeping his hand on his gun. She scrambled from the bed, her nightgown billowing around her like a sail. "Please," she whispered. "I don't understand. I have money." "I don't want your money. Get dressed." Her hands shook as she pulled on a riding skirt and blouse, fingers fumbling with the buttons. "You're the Marshal. I saw you today." "Why are you—" "Questions later. Move!" He grabbed a coat from her wardrobe and thrust it at her. "Put this on." She obeyed, her movements mechanical with shock. When she was dressed, he bound her wrists with soft rope, tight enough to hold, loose enough not to cut off circulation. "Where are we going?" The question came out as barely more than a breath. "Away from here." He checked the window. The storm was perfect cover. No one would be out in this weather. "You're going to walk with me to the stable. You're going to be quiet. You're going to do exactly what I say, because if you don't, if you scream or try to run, things will get unpleasant fast." "Clear," she nodded, rain from the open door already soaking into her hair. They made it to the stable without incident, the storm covering any sounds. Colt had already saddled a second horse, a gentle mare he'd borrowed from the livery. He lifted Celia into the saddle, noting how light she felt, like a bird in his hands. "I can't ride with my hands tied," she said, the first hint of spirit in her voice. "You'll manage." He mounted Caesar and took the mare's lead rope. "Keep your head down and hold on." They rode out of Redemption Creek at a steady walk, then pushed into a trot once they cleared the last buildings. The rain drove sideways, stinging exposed skin like needles. Celia hunched in her saddle, and Colt felt a twinge of something that might have been conscience. He pushed it down. She'd chosen to marry Trenton. Whatever happened to her now was better than what that marriage would have brought. The mountains loomed ahead, black against the storm-torn sky. By dawn they'd be deep in the canyons, where no posse could track them until the rain stopped. By then, it would be too late. Royce Trenton would wake to find his bride gone, his perfect wedding ruined, his reputation in tatters. It was just the beginning of what Colt had planned for him. But as he glanced back at the woman swaying in her saddle, soaked and shivering, something twisted in his chest. She looked nothing like the calculating fortune hunter he'd expected. She looked like what Emma might have looked like, if she'd lived to see 23. The thought made him dig his spurs into Caesar's flanks, driving them faster into the darkness. He'd come too far to let sentiment cloud his judgment now. Celia Monroe was a means to an end. Nothing more. And before this was over, Royce Trenton would know what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. The storm raged on, washing away their tracks, carrying them into the vast emptiness of the mountains where law meant nothing and only the strong survived. Behind them, Redemption Creek slept on, unaware that by morning, everything would have changed. The mountain trail narrowed as they climbed higher, forcing the horses to pick their way carefully over loose shale and exposed roots. Dawn came gray and bitter cold, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the night, leaving behind a bone-deep chill that cut through wet clothes like a skinning knife. Celia hadn't spoken for hours. Colt glanced back to see her slumped forward in the saddle, her bound hands clutching the pommel, her face pale as fresh cream. The fancy riding habit that had probably cost more than most folks in Redemption Creek saw in a year now hung on her like wet rags. "We'll stop soon," he said. The first words either had spoken since leaving town. She didn't acknowledge him, just kept that 1,000-yard stare fixed on her mare's neck. He'd seen that look before, on soldiers after their first battle. Shock. It would wear off soon enough. And then he'd have to deal with whatever came next. Tears, pleading, or maybe even some fight. The abandoned trapper's cabin appeared through the pines just as he remembered it, tucked into a hollow where the wind couldn't reach. The roof had held through last winter, and the stone chimney still stood straight. It would do. "Get down," he ordered, dismounting and moving to help her. She tried to swing her leg over, but nearly fell, her muscles stiff from cold and the long ride. He caught her waist, lifting her down like she weighed nothing. For a moment they stood close, and he caught the scent of her, lavender soap mixed with rain and fear. Her eyes met his, green as spring grass, and something flickered there besides terror. "Inside," he said gruffly, stepping back. The cabin was one room, maybe 12 feet square, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a bed frame strung with old rope. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through cracks in the shutters. It smelled of mice and old smoke. Colt busied himself starting a fire while Celia stood just inside the door, shivering. Once the flames caught, he turned to her. "Give me your hands." She extended them wordlessly, and he cut the rope with his knife. Red marks circled her wrists where the bonds had rubbed. Without thinking, he rubbed his thumb over one of the marks, and she flinched. "There's a trunk over there," he said, gesturing to the corner. "Might be some dry clothes. Get changed before you catch your death." "Where are we?" Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Safe enough for now." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her then, really looked. Despite everything, the kidnapping, the hard ride, the fear, she was trying to hold herself together. Her chin lifted slightly, a hint of steel showing through. "We're about 15 miles northwest of Redemption Creek, high in the Sangre de Cristo range. Nobody comes up here except trappers in winter, and it's too early for them." "Why?" The single word held a weight of questions. "Get changed," he repeated. "Then we'll talk." She moved to the trunk, her movements stiff and mechanical. Colt stepped outside to tend the horses, giving her privacy. The morning air bit sharp in his lungs, and he could see snow on the higher peaks. They'd need to lay low for a few days. Let any pursuit lose their trail. When he came back in, she was wearing men's clothes, canvas pants, a wool shirt, and a jacket that swallowed her small frame. Her wet things hung near the fire. She'd found a blanket too and wrapped it around her shoulders, sitting on the floor near the hearth. "Hungry?" he asked. "No." He dug in his saddlebags anyway, pulling out hardtack and dried beef. "Eat anyway. You'll need it." She took the food but just held it, staring at the flames. "You're going to kill me." It wasn't a question. He studied her profile in the firelight, the delicate line of her jaw, the way her hair fell in damp tangles around her face. "If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead." "Then what? Ransom?" "Something like that." She turned to look at him then, and he saw intelligence working behind those green eyes. "This is about Royce." He didn't answer, but something in his face must have confirmed it. "What did he do to you?" she asked softly. The question hit him like a mule kick. He'd expected tears, hysteria, maybe even attempts to seduce her way to freedom. He hadn't expected this quiet perceptiveness. "Eat," he said roughly. "Then sleep? We move again at nightfall." But she wasn't done. "He's not what he seems. I know that. Then why marry him?" A bitter smile touched her lips. "Why does any woman marry? Security, protection, the illusion of choice. You're from money. You had choices." "Did I?" She pulled the blanket tighter. "My father lost everything in the panic of '73. We've been living on credit and reputation for years. When Royce offered for me, it was marry him or watch my family lose everything." The words rang with truth, but Colt had learned not to trust sob stories. Still, something about the way she said it, matter of fact, without self-pity, made him think twice. "Get some sleep," he said again. She curled up near the fire, using her damp riding habit as a pillow. He settled in a chair by the door, rifle across his knees. The hours passed slowly, marked by the pop of the fire and her restless movements. She cried in her sleep, soft whimpers that reminded him too much of Emma's nightmares after their parents died. By afternoon, the weather had turned. Snow began falling, fat flakes that stuck to the windows and muffled all sound. Celia woke with a start, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back. She saw him watching her and pulled the blanket up like armor. "I need to—" She gestured vaguely toward the door. "Privy's out back. Don't try to run. You won't make it far in this weather, and I'd rather not have to track you down." She stood, dignity intact despite everything. "I'm not stupid. Marshal—" When she returned, snow dusted her dark hair like sugar. She moved to the fire, holding her hands out to warm them. "There's a storm coming," she observed. "Looks like it. We're trapped here." "For now." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, what was her name? He went very still. "What?" "The person Royce hurt. The reason you're doing this." "What was her name?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. He could shut her down, refuse to answer, but something about the way she asked, not prying, just acknowledging the truth of it, loosened his tongue. "Emma. Her name was Emma. Your wife." "My sister." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't try to run." But she surprised him again. Instead of promises or pleading, she said, "I won't. I've got nowhere to run to." The storm intensified as darkness fell. Wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, and snow piled against the door. They ate in silence, more hardtack. Some canned peaches he'd found in the cabin's meager supplies. "Tell me about her," Celia said suddenly. "Emma." He looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because we're stuck here, and the silence is worse than the storm." Against his better judgment, he found himself talking about Emma's laugh, like bells on a Sunday morning. How she could ride better than most men and wasn't afraid of anything except spiders. The way she'd taken care of him after a bullet took their father and consumption took their mother. "She was 19 when she died," he finished. "Accused of stealing from the silver dollar. Royce testified he'd seen her do it. They found the money in her room, planted there, though I couldn't prove it. The judge sentenced her to hang." Celia had gone very pale. "Royce had her killed? Why?" "Because she knew something she shouldn't, because she refused his advances, because he could take your pick." "Dear God." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "I knew he was, but I never imagined—" "What? That your intended was a murderer?" "I knew he was dangerous," she said quietly. "I've seen the bruises on the saloon girls, heard whispers about people who crossed him disappearing, but I thought if I was careful, if I played the proper lady, you thought you'd be safe. I thought I'd survive." The raw honesty in her voice hit him hard. This wasn't the pampered princess he'd expected. This was a woman who'd walked into a devil's bargain with her eyes open, thinking she could manage the devil. The wind screamed louder, and something crashed outside. A tree branch. Maybe. Celia jumped, then tried to cover it by standing. "I'll bank the fire for the night," she said, moving toward the hearth. That's when he noticed she was favoring her left foot. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Just twisted it when I got down from the horse." "Let me see." I said it's nothing. But he was already moving, catching her arm as she tried to step away. "Sit." She sat, probably recognizing the futility of argument. He knelt and carefully removed her boot. Her ankle was swollen, already purpling with bruises. "Why didn't you say something?" Would it have mattered? He didn't answer, just fetched snow from outside and wrapped it in a cloth. The gentle way he tended her injury seemed to surprise them both. His hands, so used to violence, remembered other skills, tending Emma's scraped knees, binding his mother's fever-weakened limbs. "Thank you," she whispered. He stood abruptly, disturbed by the moment of tenderness. "Get some sleep. Storm should blow out by morning." But the storm had other ideas. It raged for 2 days, trapping them in the small cabin with only the fire for warmth and each other for company. 2 days of careful distance, of conversations that started and stopped like a wagon with a broken wheel. 2 days of watching her try to hide her fear, her pain, her growing hunger as their supplies ran low. On the second night, with the wind howling like all the demons of hell, Celia began to shiver uncontrollably. The single blanket wasn't enough, and the fire could only do so much against the cold seeping through the walls. "Here," Colt said gruffly, holding out his coat. "You'll freeze. I've survived worse." But she was already moving, scooting across the floor until she was beside his chair. "We'll share. Body heat. It's only practical." He wanted to refuse, knew he should refuse, but she was right, and he could see her lips turning blue in the firelight. He moved to the floor, letting her curl against his side, sharing the coat and blanket. She felt small against him, fragile as a bird. But there was strength there too, in the way she held herself even while shaking with cold. They sat in silence, listening to the storm, and he tried not to think about how long it had been since he'd held anyone, since he'd allowed himself this kind of closeness. "Colt," she said softly, the first time she'd used his given name. "What happens when the storm ends?" He stared into the dying fire, wishing he had an answer that didn't involve more pain for everyone involved. "I don't know." It was the first honest thing he'd said to her, and somehow, in the wind-torn darkness with her warmth pressed against his side, it felt like both a confession and a promise. The storm broke on the third morning, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick as a wedding cake, pristine and glittering under a sun that seemed too bright after days of gray. Colt stood at the cabin door, surveying the silent wilderness while behind him. Celia stirred awake. "We need supplies," he said without turning. "There's a trading post about 5 miles north. We'll go together." You trust me not to run." "Where would you go?" He gestured at the white expanse. "Besides, that ankle won't carry you far." She'd improved some, but he'd noticed her wince when she put weight on it. Pride kept her from complaining, though he'd learned that much about her in their forced confinement. They set out after a meager breakfast of the last hardtack. He'd rigged a lead between their horses again, but it felt more like habit than necessity. Something had shifted during those storm-locked days, though neither acknowledged it. The trading post squatted like a brown toad in a clearing, smoke rising from its chimney. The proprietor, a grizzled half-breed named Joseph Two Rivers, showed no surprise at seeing the Marshal with a woman in tow. His kind had learned not to ask questions. While Colt haggled over supplies, Celia wandered the cramped aisles. She stopped at a shelf of patent medicines, reading labels with the focused attention of someone trying not to think about their circumstances. "Help you, miss?" Two Rivers' wife appeared from the back room, a Ute woman with silver-streaked braids. Do you have any willow bark for pain?" The woman studied her shrewdly, taking in the borrowed men's clothes, the bruised ankle, the way she kept glancing at Colt. "Pain of the body or pain of the spirit?" "Both, I think," Celia admitted softly. The woman gathered several small packets. Willow for the body, chamomile for sleep, and this, she pressed a tiny bundle into Celia's palm. Sage for clarity when the path seems dark. I have no money. He pays. The woman nodded toward Colt. But this is gift. Woman to woman. They left with full saddlebags, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, ammunition. The ride back was quiet, but it was a different quiet than before. Celia rode straighter, some color back in her cheeks. At the cabin, she surprised him by taking charge of cooking, producing a meal that, while simple, tasted better than anything he'd eaten in months. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" he asked, scraping his plate clean. "Necessity." She poured coffee from the battered pot. "When Father lost his money, we had to let most of the servants go. Mother took to her bed with vapors, so someone had to learn. And you drew the short straw?" "I volunteered. I liked knowing I could take care of myself, even if it was just making biscuits that didn't break teeth." He studied her across the rough table. "Why tell me this? Why not keep playing the helpless society girl?" "Because I'm tired of pretending." She met his gaze steadily. "I've been pretending my whole life. That I didn't see Father's drinking, Mother's laudanum habit, the way our friends disappeared when the money ran out, that I actually wanted to marry Royce Trenton." "Nobody forced you?" "No?" Her laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "Tell me, Marshal, what choices does a woman have when her family faces ruin? I could become a governess, perhaps, or a seamstress, work myself to death for pennies while my parents lose their home. Or I could marry a rich man who wants a pretty ornament with good bloodlines. Plenty of women work honest jobs. Yes, and God bless them for it. But I made my choice with open eyes. I knew what Royce was. I thought I could endure it." The truth of it sat heavy between them. He'd kidnapped her thinking he was stealing something precious from Trenton, only to find he'd taken a prisoner who was already in a cage. "Emma tried to work an honest job," he said suddenly, surprising himself. "Took in washing, mended clothes, but it wasn't enough after our parents died. That's how she ended up working at the Silver Dollar. As a serving drinks, nothing more. No matter what people said later." His jaw tightened. She was saving money, planning to leave town. Then she saw something she shouldn't have. What did she see? He hesitated, then figured she had a right to know. Royce murdering a man. A rancher named Patterson who wouldn't sell his water rights. She was bringing drinks to the back room, saw Royce shoot him in cold blood, made the mistake of gasping. Celia had gone pale, and he couldn't let her live. He tried to buy her silence first, then threatened her. When that didn't work, he stood abruptly, unable to sit still. He planted that money, had his men swear they saw her take it. The trial was over in an hour. "Couldn't you stop it? You were Marshal." "Deputy then. The Marshal was in Royce's pocket, like half the town. I tried to get evidence, tried to find witnesses, but people were scared, and I was just a nobody with a badge." She rose and moved to where he stood by the window. "So now you take justice into your own hands." "Justice?" He laughed harshly. "This isn't justice. This is revenge." "What's the difference?" "Justice would bring Emma back. This is just making him hurt like I hurt." She touched his arm gently. "And do I hurt enough yet? Have I paid for choosing survival over virtue?" The question cut deep. He looked down at her, seeing not Trenton's bride, but a woman who'd made impossible choices in an impossible world. Without thinking, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You shouldn't pay for his sins," he said roughly. "But I am. We both know it." The moment stretched taut between them. She didn't move away from his touch, and he found himself studying the gold flecks in her green eyes, the determined set of her chin. When had she stopped being cargo and become... what? He didn't have words for it. A sound outside broke the spell. Horses, moving fast through the snow. Colt grabbed his rifle, pushing Celia behind him. "Stay down." But it was only a deer, crashing through the drifts in startled leaps. The tension broken. They moved apart, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing. The next days fell into a rhythm. Mornings spent on necessary tasks, hauling water, tending the horses, gathering firewood. Afternoons passed in wary conversation, each revealing pieces of themselves like poker players showing cards. Evenings by the fire, reading from an old Bible Two Rivers' wife had tucked into their supplies. One night, Celia asked to see his scars. Why? Because they're part of your story, like Emma is. He'd never shown them to anyone. These maps of violence written on his skin. But something in her voice, not pity, just acceptance, made him unbutton his shirt. She studied them in the firelight, tracing one with her finger. A knife wound from a saloon brawl. Bullet graze from a bank robber. The mess of scar tissue on his shoulder where a mountain cat had tried to take him down. This one? She touched a thin line across his ribs. Emma, when she was 12, learning to throw knives, her aim needed work. You let your little sister practice knife throwing on you? She was very persuasive. A smile ghosted across his face. And stubborn. God, was she stubborn? Like someone else I know. Celia smiled back. And for a moment the cabin felt warm with more than fire. Then reality crept back in like cold through the chinks. What happens now, Colt? We can't stay here forever. I know. Are you going to use me to call Royce out? Trade me for a confession? That was the plan. Was? He stood abruptly, moving away from her warmth. Plans change. Not yours. You've been working toward this for 3 years. You won't stop now. She was right, and they both knew it. But something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't supposed to matter. She wasn't supposed to be brave and clever and kind. She wasn't supposed to look at his scars like they were just part of him, not something monstrous. That night, wolves came down from the higher mountains, their howls raising primitive fears. Celia startled awake, a small cry escaping her lips. Just wolves, he said from his chair. They won't come near the fire. But another howl, closer, had her scrambling from her makeshift bed. Are you sure? Mostly sure. That's not reassuring. She wrapped the blanket around herself, moving closer to where he sat. Would you mind if I? Come on. He shifted, making room beside him. She curled against his side, trembling slightly. I'm not usually afraid of things, but that sound, it's old fear, from when we lived in caves and darkness meant death. Is that what you tell yourself? When the nightmares come? He looked down at her sharply. What makes you think I have nightmares? You cry out sometimes. Emma's name, mostly. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in silence, listening to the wolves circle their territory, until her breathing evened out in sleep. He should move, put distance between them. Instead, he pulled her closer, telling himself it was just for warmth. But when she murmured his name in her sleep and pressed her face against his chest, he knew he was lying. Just like he knew that whatever happened next, his careful plan for revenge had already started to crumble, undermined by a woman who made impossible choices and looked at his scars without flinching. The wolves sang until dawn, wild and mournful, and Colt held Celia through it all, wondering if he was protector or captor, wondering if there was even a difference anymore. When the first light crept through the windows, she stirred against him, and their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. Everything had changed. The question now was what they would do about it. The morning brought trouble on horseback. Colt spotted the dust cloud first, rising like smoke against the crystal sky. 5 riders, maybe 6, moving with purpose through the valley below. He pulled Celia back from the window, finger to his lips. Pack everything, he whispered. Fast. She didn't question, just moved. They'd developed this wordless understanding over the past days. When to talk, when to act. Within minutes, their few possessions were stuffed into saddlebags. Royce's men, she asked, rolling blankets with practiced efficiency. Most likely, that or bounty hunters. Either way, we can't stay. They slipped out the back as voices carried up the slope. Colt led the horses through the trees, picking a path through patches of bare ground to minimize tracks. Behind them, someone kicked in the cabin door. This way, he murmured, guiding them into a narrow ravine choked with deadfall. They moved like ghosts through the timber, using every trick he'd learned tracking outlaws. Double back here, wade through an icy stream there, always climbing higher into the maze of granite peaks and hidden valleys that made up the Sangre de Cristos. By noon, they'd put miles between themselves and their pursuers. But Colt knew it was temporary. Men who tracked for Trenton didn't give up easy. There, he pointed to an overhang of rock forming a shallow cave. We'll rest the horses. Celia slid from her saddle, legs shaking from the hard ride. She'd kept up without complaint, but he could see the strain in the tight line of her jaw, the careful way she moved. Let me check that ankle, he said. It's fine. Celia. She sighed and sat on a fallen log, allowing him to kneel and examine the joint. The swelling had gone down, but fresh bruises bloomed where her boot had rubbed. You should have said something. When? While we were running for our lives? She attempted a smile. Besides, I've had worse from dancing in too tight slippers at cotillions. He rewrapped the ankle carefully, trying not to think about how natural this had become. Tending her hurts, her tending his, like an old married couple, except for the small matter of kidnapping and pursuit. Colt, her voice was soft. You could leave me here. They want me back alive. You could disappear into these mountains. Start over somewhere. He looked up sharply. Is that what you want? I want... She stopped, seeming to search for words. I want impossible things. Such as never having met Royce Trenton. Such as Emma being alive. Such as... She touched his face gently. Such as meeting you in another life. Or you weren't seeking revenge and I wasn't anybody's bargaining chip. The touch burned like a brand. He caught her hand, meaning to push it away, but found himself holding it instead. This is the only life we get, he said roughly. I know. She leaned forward until their foreheads almost touched. That's what makes it so unfair. He should have pulled back, should have reminded them both why they were here, what stood between them. Instead, he turned his head slightly, his lips brushing her palm. She made a small sound, like a caught breath, and then they were moving together, drawn by something stronger than reason. The kiss was nothing like he'd imagined, and God help him, he had imagined it. It was desperate and tender at once, tasting of trail dust and sorrow and something wilder, like lightning before rain. Her hands tangled in his hair, and he pulled her closer, feeling the racing of her heart against his chest. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back like a cold wind. I'm sorry, he started, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't apologize. Just don't lie to me. Whatever happens next, don't lie. Voices echoed up the ravine. The hunters had found their trail. Move, Colt ordered. The moment shattered. They pushed deeper into the mountains, trading altitude for safety. The horses labored through chest-deep drifts, and more than once they had to dismount and lead them through passages too treacherous to ride. As darkness fell, they reached a high valley Colt remembered from his outlaw hunting days. A half-dozen caves pocked the cliff face like empty eye sockets. He chose one with a narrow entrance but room enough inside for them and the horses. No fire tonight, he said, pulling off his gloves to check his rifle. They're that close? Close enough. They ate cold biscuits and dried meat in the dark, huddled together for warmth. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the threat of another storm. Tell me about after, Celia said suddenly. After what? After you get your revenge. What then? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I hadn't thought that far. Because you don't expect to survive it. It wasn't a question. He felt her shift beside him, felt her hand find his in the darkness. I'm not afraid of dying, he said. Haven't been since Emma. That's not living, Colt. That's just waiting for death to catch up. What would you have me do? Forget? Forgive? I'd have you consider that Emma might want more for you than this. That maybe the best revenge would be living well despite what happened. You didn't know her. No. But I know you. And the man who let his sister practice knife throwing on him, who carries her memory like a saint's medallion. That man would want his sister to rest easy. How can she, knowing you're throwing your life away for her? The words hit deep, finding places he'd kept armored for 3 years. Before he could respond, a sound outside made them both freeze, horses, picking their way up the valley. Colt moved silent as smoke to the cave entrance. 3 riders, dark shapes against the star-filled snow. They'd lit torches, sweeping them back and forth like they were looking for something, or someone. He eased back to where Celia waited. They'll search every cave. We need to move deeper in, hope this connects to another exit. They felt their way through absolute darkness, hands on the rough walls, leading the increasingly nervous horses. The cave narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again until the horses could barely squeeze through. Just when Colt thought they'd have to turn back, his hand felt emptiness. Another chamber. They stumbled into a space that echoed with their movements, suggesting sighs, and miracle of miracles. A faint light filtered from somewhere above. "Look," Celia whispered. Phosphorescent minerals lined parts of the walls, glowing with their own ghostly light. An underground stream gurgled somewhere in the darkness. It was like stepping into another world, hidden and secret and strange. They settled the horses near the water and explored their sanctuary. The light came from a chimney-like opening far overhead, too high and narrow to be useful, but enough to ease the pressing dark. "It's almost beautiful," Celia said, watching the minerals pulse with their cold fire. Emma would have loved it. Colt said without thinking. She always said there was magic in the mountains, if you knew where to look. "She sounds wonderful." She was. He found himself smiling at memories long buried under grief. "Wild as a Mustang and twice as stubborn. Used to drive me half crazy trying to keep her out of trouble." "Tell me more." So he did. In that strange glowing cave, with danger prowling outside, he told her stories he'd locked away. Emma trying to ride an unbroken stallion. Emma sneaking into the saloon dressed as a boy to hear the traveling musicians. Emma insisting on learning to shoot, saying a woman needed to protect herself in this world. She was right about that, Celia said softly. I tried to protect her. Failed. You can't protect everyone. Colt, sometimes people make their own choices, take their own risks. Like you did? Choosing Trenton? Like I did. She moved closer, drawn by cold and something more. And like I'm doing now. The kiss this time was slower, deeper, with the weight of choice behind it. They both knew what lines they were crossing, what complications they were creating, but in that moment, in that impossible cave with its ghost-light walls, none of it mattered. When they drew apart, Colt saw tears on her cheeks, silver in the strange light. What is it? I'm going to lose you, she whispered. One way or another. This ends with loss. He couldn't deny it. So he kissed her again instead, tasting salt and sorrow. They made a bed of blankets on the sandy floor, holding each other while the hunters searched above, while the horses dozed and the stream sang its ancient song. I would change it if I could, he said against her hair. All of it. I know. She pressed closer, as if she could hold him here through will alone. But you can't. We can't. So we take what we're given. They didn't make love. Not yet. Not with everything still tangled between them. But they held each other through the long night, sharing warmth and breath and the bitter knowledge that dawn would bring choices neither wanted to face, somewhere in the dark hours. Celia spoke again. Promise me something. What? When this is over, however it ends, live. Really live. Not for revenge or duty or anyone else's memory. For yourself. He couldn't make that promise, and she knew it. But he kissed her forehead and held her tighter. And for those few hours in their glowing sanctuary, it was enough. Dawn came like judgment, filtering down through their chimney to the sky. The voices were gone. The hunters moved on or lying in wait. Either way, they couldn't stay hidden forever. As they prepared to leave, Celia caught his arm. I meant what I said about impossible things. I know. Do you? Because I think you believe this is just circumstance, that I'm confused or trying to survive. But it's not that. It's never been that. He looked at her in the growing light. Hair tangled, clothes dirty, face drawn with exhaustion, and saw the most beautiful thing he'd ever laid eyes on. Beautiful in her courage, her honesty, her refusal to surrender to despair. Celia, I know you can't say it back. I know there's too much between us, but I needed you to know. In case we don't get another chance. He pulled her close, pouring everything he couldn't say into the embrace. Outside, their uncertain future waited. But for one moment more, they had this, two damaged souls finding grace in an impossible place, holding tight against the coming storm. They emerged from the cave into a world of crystal and silence. The storm had passed in the night, leaving fresh snow that sparkled like scattered diamonds. No sign of their pursuers remained except boot prints already softening in the wind. Too quiet, Colt muttered, scanning the ridgeline. They descended carefully, taking a different route than they'd climbed. The horses picked their way through the drifts while Colt watched for any sign of ambush. But the mountains seemed to hold their breath, waiting. By midday, they'd reached lower elevations where the snow thinned to patches. That's when they saw the smoke, a thin column rising from a grove of aspens ahead. "Stay here," Colt ordered, dismounting. "No." Celia swung down beside him. "We stay together." He wanted to argue, but saw the set of her jaw. She'd made her choice back in that glowing cave, and she wouldn't be moved now. They approached on foot, weapons ready. Through the trees, a familiar figure sat by a small fire, coffee pot bubbling on the coals. "Took you long enough," Deputy Tom Briggs said without looking up. "Coffee's almost ready." Colt kept his rifle trained on his former deputy. "Tom, Marshal." Tom finally met his eyes, his weathered face unreadable. "Miss Monroe." "You alone?" Colt asked. "Do I look stupid enough to take on Colt Avery with a posse?" Tom poured 3 cups of coffee with steady hands. "Sit, we need to talk." "Talk from there." Tom sighed. 3 years we rode together. Colt, if I meant you harm, you'd already know it." Something in his tone made Colt lower the rifle slightly. Celia touched his arm, a gentle pressure that said trust against his better judgment. They sat across the fire from Tom, though Colt kept his hand near his gun. "Royce sent 20 men after you," Tom began. "Half the territory's looking, but they're looking in the wrong places. Why tell us?" "Because I knew Emma too." Tom's voice went rough. "Because I stood there like a coward when they put the rope around her neck, telling myself it was the law, it was justice. Haven't slept sound since." The confession hung between them like smoke. Celia reached for Colt's hand under cover of her skirt, grounding him. "What do you want?" "Tom, to give you a chance. There's a federal marshal in Denver. Name of Samuel Curtis. Clean as they come. Can't be bought. He's been investigating Royce for months. The murders, the land grabs, all of it. But he needs witnesses, evidence. I tried the law before. You tried local law. This is different. Curtis has the backing to make charges stick, even against someone like Trenton." Tom pulled a leather portfolio from his saddlebags. "Emma kept records. Found them hidden in her room after details about Patterson's murder, other crimes. I've been holding on to them, waiting for the right moment." Colt stared at the portfolio like it might bite. "Why didn't you come forward before?" "Because I'm a coward. Because Royce owns half the town. Because it wouldn't have brought Emma back." Tom's voice broke. "But maybe it can save Miss Monroe here from becoming the next victim." "I can speak for myself," Celia said quietly. "What guarantee do we have this Marshal Curtis can protect us?" "None, but it's better odds than running until Royce's men catch up." Tom stood, leaving the portfolio by the fire. "There's a cabin about 10 miles west, old line shack from the Broken J Ranch. Nobody uses it anymore. Hole up there while I ride to Denver. Bring Curtis back. Should take 4, maybe 5 days. And if you betray us?" Tom looked old suddenly, every hard year etched in his face. "Then you'll kill me, and I'll deserve it. But I'm tired of carrying this weight, Colt. Tired of seeing Emma swing every time I close my eyes." He mounted his horse and looked back once. "That cabin, there's supplies cached under the floorboards. And Colt, whatever's growing between you two, don't let revenge poison it. Emma wouldn't want that." Then he was gone, leaving them with the dying fire and impossible choices. "It could be a trap," Colt said. "It could be." Celia picked up the portfolio, opening it carefully. Her face went pale as she read Emma's neat handwriting. Dates, names, details of crimes witnessed. Dear God, she was building a case against him. And it got her killed. No, her courage got noticed. There's a difference. Celia looked up at him. This is our chance, Colt, to get real justice, not just revenge. He wanted to argue, to say justice had already failed them once, but looking at her face, seeing hope war with fear, he found his anger shifting into something else, something that considered futures beyond a bullet and a grave. They found the line shack as Tom described, weathered but solid, with a good view of the approaches. True to his word, supplies waited under the floor, canned goods, ammunition, even a bottle of whiskey, as they settled in for what might be their last free days. Celia grew quiet. She moved around the small space, organizing their few possessions, her movements sharp with nervous energy. Say it, Colt finally demanded. What if I don't want to testify? What if I just want to disappear? Start over somewhere Royce Trenton is just a bad memory. Then we disappear. She turned to face him, tears threatening. You'd do that. Give up your revenge. He stopped, really thinking about it. Could he? Could he ride away knowing Emma's killer walked free? But looking at Celia, he found another question. Could he sacrifice her for a revenge that would bring Emma back? I don't know, he admitted. But I know seeing you hurt would be worse than letting him live. She crossed to him then, taking his face in her hands. I'll testify. Of course I will. But I needed to know you'd choose me, that I wasn't just a means to an end anymore. You haven't been that for a while now, he said roughly. When did it change? Maybe when you looked at my scars without flinching. Maybe when you asked about Emma like she mattered. Maybe that first night when you could have screamed and didn't. He pulled her closer. Does it matter? Yes, she whispered. Because I need to know this is real. That when the danger's past and the choices are made, you won't look at me and see your enemy's bride. He kissed her then, pouring 3 years of loneliness and a lifetime of unspoken need into the connection. She responded with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt like she could anchor him there forever. When they broke apart, both breathing ragged, he rested his forehead against hers. I see you, Celia, just you. She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Then see all of me. This time when they came together, there were no more barriers. In the fading light of the cabin, they found each other with desperate tenderness. Each touch was a promise, each kiss a claim against an uncertain future. They made love like the world might end tomorrow, because it might. Afterward, they lay entwined on the narrow bed, skin to skin, hearts finally open. I love you, she said simply. I know it's impossible and probably foolish, but I do. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Emma would have liked you, would have said you were too good for a broken-down lawman with more scars than sense. And what do you say? I say. He tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. I say I've been dead for 3 years, and you brought me back to life. I say if that's not love, I don't know what is. She cried then, great gulping sobs that shook her whole body. He held her through it, understanding. They were tears for everything, for Emma, for the innocence they'd both lost, for the future that might still be stolen from them. But mostly they were tears of relief, of two souls finding harbor in the storm. They spent the next days in a strange honeymoon, making love, talking about everything and nothing, planning futures they might never see. Celia told him about her childhood dreams of being a naturalist, studying plants and animals. He admitted he'd once wanted to be a teacher before life pushed him toward a badge. "We could go to California," she said one evening, curled against his chest. "Start fresh. You could teach. I could study. Be normal people with normal lives. Would that be enough? After this, a quiet life sounds like paradise." She traced patterns on his chest. "What about you? Could you be happy without the badge?" He thought about it. Really considered a life of chalk dust and lesson plans instead of gunpowder and pursuit. "With you, I could be happy anywhere." But even as they spun dreams, reality prowled outside. On the fourth night, Colt woke to Caesar's nervous whicker. He slipped from bed, reaching for his gun, every sense alert. Through the window, he saw them, riders, approaching slow and careful. Too many to fight. He woke Celia with a touch, saw understanding bloom in her eyes. "How many?" "6, maybe more." She dressed quickly, hands steady despite the fear he could see in her face. "Tom betrayed us, or they tracked us on their own." He checked his weapons, mind racing through options. Few, and none good. "Colt," her voice was calm. "If they take me back, I'll survive. I'll find a way to—" "No." The word came out harsh. "We stay together. Even if it means dying." He met her eyes, especially then. She kissed him, fierce and quick. "Then let's make them earn it." They took positions at opposite windows, weapons ready. The riders had stopped just out of rifle range, dark shapes against darker trees, waiting for dawn. Probably waiting to see their quarry clear. "Colt," Celia's voice was thoughtful. "What if we didn't wait?" "What do you mean?" "What if we went out to meet them, on our terms?" It was crazy. It was also unexpected, which made it their best chance. He considered angles, possibilities. "Together," he said finally. "Together," she agreed. They slipped out the back as the eastern sky began to lighten, moving through the trees like ghosts. They circled their hunters. In the growing light, Colt recognized faces. Trenton's men, led by his foreman. "Jake Hawkins. Ready?" he whispered. Celia checked her rifle. He'd taught her to shoot these past days, and she'd taken to it with surprising skill. "Ready." They stepped from cover just as the sun broke the horizon, catching their enemies flat-footed and blind in the sudden light. "Morning, boys," Colt called out. "Looking for someone?" The surprise lasted seconds, but seconds were all they needed. When Hawkins went for his gun, Colt's shot took his weapon hand. Another man tried to flank them. Celia's rifle spoke, and he spun from his saddle. "Next one's fatal," Colt announced as the rest froze. "Your choice." The standoff stretched taut as wire. Hawkins clutched his bleeding hand, face twisted with pain and rage. The other men sat frozen in their saddles, calculating odds that weren't in their favor. "Smart boys," Colt said, keeping his rifle steady. "Now drop the guns, slow and easy." One by one, weapons hit the ground. Celia moved to gather them, never taking her eyes off the riders. She'd changed these past days, found steel in her spine that had always been there, waiting. "Trenton's gonna kill you both," Hawkins snarled, slow and painful. "He's welcome to try," Colt replied. "But right now, you boys are riding back to town with a message. Tell Royce if he wants his bride, he comes himself. Noon, tomorrow, the old hanging tree outside town, just him and me. He won't come alone. Then he's a coward as well as a murderer." Colt's voice went cold. "But you tell him this, if I see anyone else, if I even smell a trap, Miss Monroe disappears forever. He'll never know what happened to her. Never have his prize. That'll eat at him worse than bullets." The men exchanged glances. They knew their boss, knew how he prized control above all else. The not knowing would drive him mad. "Get going," Celia ordered, surprising them all with her authority. "And leave the horses. You can walk back. Consider it penance for chasing a woman through the mountains." Hawkins looked ready to argue until Colt shifted his rifle meaningfully. They dismounted and began the long trudge toward town, Hawkins cradling his ruined hand. When they were gone, Celia lowered her weapon with shaking hands. Will he come? He'll come. Can't resist the challenge. And he needs you to secure those railroad connections. So we're back to being bait and hunter? He caught her shoulders, turning her to face him. We're partners. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. She searched his eyes, then nodded. Partners. They spent the day preparing, cleaning weapons, planning contingencies, trying not to think about how it might end. As night fell, Tom Briggs arrived with 3 riders, dust-covered and grim. Marshal Samuel Curtis. Tom introduced a lean man with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair. He rode hard from Denver when I told him the situation. Curtis dismounted, studying them with a lawman's assessment. Miss Monroe. Marshal Avery. Tom's told me the story, but I need to hear it from you. Everything. They talked through the night, Curtis taking notes in precise handwriting. Celia spoke of Royce's threats, his controlling behavior, the fear that had driven her to accept his proposal. Colt detailed Emma's death, the cover-up, years of gathered evidence. It's enough to start, Curtis said finally. But Trenton's confession would seal it. You're planning to force that, one way or another. Curtis frowned. I can't officially sanction. I'm not asking for sanction. Just be ready to act on what you hear. The federal marshal wrestled with duty and pragmatism, finally nodding. We'll be close, but Avery, if you kill him before he confesses, then justice loses. I know. Dawn came too soon. They rode toward Redemption Creek as the sun climbed, Celia proud in the saddle beside him. She dressed carefully, not in the borrowed men's clothes, but in her traveling suit, cleaned and pressed. A lady meeting her fate with dignity. The hanging tree stood alone on a rise outside town, its branches twisted by years of wind and weight. The same tree where Emma had died, where justice had become a mockery. Full circle, Colt thought. Royce was already there, mounted on a black stallion that matched his suit. He'd come alone as demanded, but Colt could see riders on the distant ridges. Insurance, in case things went badly. Celia, my dear, Royce called out as they approached. You've led us quite a chase. Royce, her voice was steady, cold. I believe you know Marshal Avery. By reputation. Royce's eyes glittered with malice. The drunk who couldn't save his sister. Tell me, Avery, does stolen goods fill the hole she left? Colt dismounted slowly, hand near his gun. Get down. Trenton, let's finish this. Gladly. Royce swung from his saddle with a gambler's grace. Though I confess disappointment, I expected more creativity from you than simple vengeance. Sometimes simple is best. They faced each other across 20 feet of bare ground. The wind whispered through the hanging tree's branches, carrying memories of rope and regret. Before we begin, Royce said conversationally, you should know I've made arrangements. If I don't return, my men have orders concerning dear Celia. Unpleasant orders. You'd hurt her even in death? Celia asked, genuine surprise in her voice. I knew you were cruel, Royce, but I thought you at least wanted me alive. I want you obedient. If I can't have that, he shrugged. Well, a tragic end to a kidnapping gone wrong would cement my reputation as the wronged party. Except you won't be around to enjoy it, Colt pointed out. True. But revenge has its own satisfaction, doesn't it? You should understand that. I understand you're a murdering snake who hides behind money and influence. Royce's composure cracked slightly. Careful, Marshal. Words have consequences. So do actions, like killing Walter Patterson, like framing my sister for a theft that never happened. Prove it. Emma saw you shoot Patterson. You couldn't let her live with that knowledge. The word of a saloon girl? Royce laughed. Who'd believe that? A federal marshal might, Celia said quietly, especially with Emma's written testimony. Royce went still. You're lying. Am I? She pulled the portfolio from her saddlebags. She documented everything. Royce, dates, times, witnesses. She was building a case to take to authorities outside your influence. Give that to me. His hand moved toward his gun. I don't think so. Colt stepped between them. But I'll make you a deal. Face me fair. And if you win, you ride away clean. If I win, you confess. Everything. And if I refuse, then I shoot you where you stand, and we let the court sort out the rest from Emma's notes. Royce calculated odds with a gambler's precision. You always were too noble for your own good. Avery, fine. Your terms. They stepped apart, hands hovering over their weapons. The morning sun threw long shadows, and somewhere a meadowlark sang, incongruous in the tension. One question first, Royce said. Did you bed her? Did you take what was mine? She was never yours. Colt replied, never anyone's property. I'll take that as a yes. Royce smiled coldly. Good. It'll make killing you sweeter. Time slowed. Colt saw Royce's hand move, saw the tell in his shoulder that preceded the draw. His own hand moved without thought. Muscle memory from 1,000 practice draws. 2 shots cracked across the morning air, so close they sounded as one. Royce's bullet took Colt high in the shoulder, spinning him half around. But Colt's shot was true, catching Royce center mass. The gambler stumbled, looking down at the spreading red stain with genuine surprise. You're faster than I thought, he gasped, falling to his knees. Colt pressed his hand to his own wound, staying upright through will alone. Emma was my sister. Did you think I wouldn't practice for this moment? Celia was off her horse, running to Colt, but he waved her toward Royce. Get his confession, quick! She knelt by the dying man. Tell the truth. Royce, for once in your life, tell the truth. Royce coughed, blood on his lips. Truth. The truth is, I killed Patterson. Shot him in the back over water rights. Your precious Emma saw it all. And? Celia pressed. And I couldn't let her testify. So I planted that money, paid witnesses to lie. The judge was mine anyway. He laughed. A wet, ugly sound. She died for nothing, just another casualty of business. Did you kill others? Curtis had appeared, badge gleaming, writing down every word. Others? Royce's eyes were glazing. Morrison, Jenkins, that homesteader family on Willow Creek, all in the way of progress. He focused on Colt with effort. But Emma was personal. She looked at me like I was dirt. Nobody looks at Royce Trenton that way. He convulsed once, then went still, his sightless eyes staring at the hanging tree that had claimed his victim 3 years before. Colt sagged, and Celia caught him, easing him to the ground. How bad? Had worse, he lied, feeling blood soak his shirt. Don't you dare, she said fiercely, pressing her scarf to the wound. Don't you dare die on me now. Not planning to. He caught her hand. Too much to live for. Curtis was already calling for the doctor, sending riders ahead. Tom appeared with horses to block the wind, face grim but satisfied. You did it, he said. Justice for Emma, finally. Colt looked at Royce's still form, waiting to feel triumph or satisfaction or something. Instead, he just felt tired, empty. 3 years of living for revenge, and now... Hey, Celia said softly, reading his thoughts. It's over. You can let go now. I don't know how, he admitted. Then we'll learn together. She kissed his forehead, heedless of the blood and dust. Partners, remember? As the doctor's wagon approached, Colt squeezed her hand. Emma was gone. Would always be gone. But maybe, just maybe, he could honor her memory by living the life she'd been denied, a life with love and purpose beyond the gun. California? He asked. Wherever you want, Celia promised. As long as it's together. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth, and the meadowlark continued its song. Death had visited this place too often, but today, despite everything, life had won. The doctor's house smelled of carbolic acid and whiskey. Colt drifted in and out of consciousness for 3 days, fever dreams mixing with reality until he couldn't tell which was which. Sometimes Emma stood at the foot of his bed, smiling and whole. Sometimes Celia held his hand, whispering prayers he couldn't quite hear. On the fourth day, he woke clear-headed to find Celia asleep in a chair beside his bed, her hand still clasping his. She looked exhausted, shadows dark beneath her eyes, still wearing the same blood-stained dress from the shooting. "You need to rest," he croaked. Her eyes flew open. "You're awake, really awake." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she leaned forward. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "Can't promise." He tried to sit up, winced at the pull of bandages. "How long?" 4 days. The doctor said the bullet nicked an artery. You almost—" She couldn't finish. "But I didn't." He squeezed her hand. "What's happened?" "Marshal Curtis arrested 12 men based on Royce's confession and Emma's notes. The mayor resigned. Half the town council's under investigation." She managed a weak smile. "You've caused quite an upheaval." "Good." The doctor appeared, a thin man with gentle hands who pronounced Colt lucky to be alive. "Week or 2 more rest. You'll be good as new." "Well, mostly. That shoulder's going to ache when it rains." "I can live with that." "Question is, what else can you live with?" The doctor's eyes were knowing. "Seen men like you before, Marshal. Living for one purpose so long they don't know what to do when it's gone." After he left, Colt stared at the ceiling. The doctor was right. For 3 years, revenge had been his North Star. "Now, I resigned," he said suddenly. Celia looked up from the basin where she was wringing out a cloth. "What?" "The badge. Soon as I can walk, I'm turning it in. I'm done with killing. Done with the law. Done with all of it." She crossed to him, studying his face. "Are you sure? It's been your life." "No, Emma was my life. Then revenge was. The badge was just a tool." He caught her hand. "I want something different now. Something clean. What do you want?" He thought about it, really considered what Colt Avery might be without a gun on his hip and justice on his mind. "I want to wake up without anger. I want to build instead of tear down. I want—" He met her eyes. "I want you, if you'll have me. Not the Marshal, not the grieving brother. Just me." She kissed him softly, carefully. "I've only ever wanted just you." But the world wasn't done with them yet. On his first day out of bed, Tom brought news that Celia's parents had arrived from St. Louis. They were staying at the Grand Hotel, demanding to see their daughter. "I have to go," Celia said, though her face showed what the prospect cost her. "We'll go together." "Colt, you can barely walk." "Then you'll hold me up." She did, arm around his waist as they made their way down Main Street. People stared at the Marshal who'd brought down Royce Trenton, at the woman who'd been kidnapped and emerged stronger. Whispers followed them like dust. The meeting was worse than he'd expected. Margaret Monroe was a faded version of her daughter, beautiful once but worn thin by disappointment and laudanum. Richard Monroe had the soft look of a man who'd given up fighting years ago. "Darling," Margaret said, not rising from her chair, "you've caused such scandal." "Mother." Celia's voice was carefully neutral. Richard cleared his throat. "You'll come home with us, of course. We can manage the talk. Find you another match." "No." The word hung in the air like a slap. "I beg your pardon?" Margaret's voice sharpened. "I said no. I'm not coming back. I'm not marrying anyone you choose. I'm done being currency in your social transactions." "You ungrateful girl. After everything we've done—" "What you've done," Celia interrupted, steel in her voice, "is try to sell me to a murderer to cover your debts. What you've done is choose appearances over my safety, your comfort over my life." "How dare you?" "I dare because I've learned what courage looks like." She glanced at Colt. "I've learned what love looks like, and it's nothing like what you taught me." Richard stood, face flushed. "If you don't come home, you're no daughter of ours. You'll get nothing, you understand?" "Nothing. I understand." Celia's chin lifted. "I choose nothing with him over everything without him." They left the hotel in silence, but Colt felt her trembling. Once outside, she broke down, sobbing against his good shoulder while he held her awkwardly, mindful of his wound. "You didn't have to do that," he said when she'd quieted. Yes, I did. She wiped her face. I meant what I said in that cave. I'm tired of pretending, tired of being what everyone else needs me to be. What do you need to be? She considered. Yours, mine, free. They were married a week later in the doctor's parlor, with Tom and Curtis as witnesses. Celia wore a simple blue dress borrowed from the doctor's wife. Colt managed to stand through the ceremony, though he was sweating by the end. Not how you imagined your wedding, I bet, he said afterward. No. She smiled, radiant despite everything. It's better. They stayed in town another month while Colt healed and Curtis finished his investigation. The revelations from Royce's papers shook Redemption Creek to its foundations. Some people looked at them with gratitude, others with resentment. They'd upset the order of things. Exposed comfortable lies. We can't stay here, Celia observed one evening. They sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. I know. He'd been thinking the same. Too many ghosts here. Too many memories. California? He thought about it. Maybe. Or Colorado. Somewhere we can start fresh. Somewhere Emma would have liked. The mention of his sister no longer brought sharp pain, just a gentle ache. She would have liked anywhere with mountains and sky. Said cities made her feel caged. Then we find mountains and sky. They left on a bright morning in October, a wagon loaded with their few possessions and hopes for the future. Tom saw them off, pressing a letter into Colt's hand. From the town council. They voted you a pension, not much, but enough to start over. Colt tried to refuse, but Tom wouldn't hear it. You earned it. Emma earned it. Don't let pride make you stupid. As they drove out of Redemption Creek, Celia asked, Any regrets? Colt considered. His shoulder ached, would always ache. He'd traded his badge for uncertainty, his purpose for possibility. But beside him sat a woman who'd chosen him over comfort, who'd found strength in captivity and emerged not broken, but transformed. No, he said finally, no regrets. They camped that night by a stream, under stars that seemed impossibly bright after the town's dust and smoke. Celia made a simple meal while Colt tended the horses, domestic in a way that still surprised him. I've been thinking, she said as they ate, about what comes next. And I want to learn, really learn, not just embroidery and French, but useful things, medicine, maybe, or teaching. She looked almost shy. Is that foolish? Nothing about you is foolish. You haven't seen me try to shoe a horse yet. He laughed, the sound rusty but real. We'll learn together. I'm thinking of trying my hand at carpentry, building things instead of tearing them down. I'd like that, a house of our own, built by your hands. They made love under the stars, gentle with his healing shoulder, fierce with promise. Afterward, they lay wrapped in blankets and each other, planning a future that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. Do you think she'd approve? Celia asked softly. Emma? Colt was quiet, remembering his sister's laugh, her fierce protectiveness, her dreams of a bigger world. I think she'd say it's about time I stopped living in the past and found something worth building. And have you found something worth building? He pulled her closer, breathed in the scent of her hair. No longer lavender soap, but sage and wood smoke and possibility. Yeah, I have. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, but it didn't sound lonesome. It sounded wild and free, calling to its mate across the vast spaces. Colt thought about the cabin they'd build, the life they'd make, the children that might come. Simple dreams for a man who'd lived for complexity and violence. But sometimes simple was enough. Sometimes it was everything. As sleep took him, Colt felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of bonds he'd worn so long he'd forgotten they were there. Emma was gone, would always be gone, but her memory no longer demanded blood. It asked only that he live, fully and freely, the way she'd never got the chance to. With Celia warm beside him and the whole frontier stretched ahead, he thought maybe, just maybe, he could do that. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. And somewhere in that vast darkness, a broken Marshal and a gambler's stolen bride began the long journey toward healing, toward hope, toward home. 1 year later, the scent of fresh bread filled the small house, mingling with sawdust and mountain pine. Celia pulled another loaf from the oven, her movements sure and practiced now, so different from the woman who'd once worn silk gloves to avoid calluses. "Smells like heaven," Colt said from the doorway, brushing wood shavings from his shirt. "Flattery will get you an extra slice," she replied, smiling at the sight of him. A year of honest work had broadened his shoulders, and the haunted look had finally left his eyes. He still wore his gun. Old habits died hard, but it stayed in the holster more often than not. They'd settled in Sanctuary Valley, Colorado, a place so new it barely had a name. Just 40 families carved from wilderness. Folks who minded their own business and judged a man by his work, not his past. The house Colt built sat on a rise overlooking the valley. 2 rooms now, but with space to grow. "Letter came," he said, producing an envelope from his pocket. "Tom Briggs." Celia wiped her hands on her apron, another thing that would have shocked her St. Louis acquaintances. "What's the news?" Colt scanned the letter, his expression shifting. "Judge Matthews died peacefully in his sleep. Tom says half the town turned out for the funeral." "The judge who sentenced Emma?" "Yeah." Colt folded the letter slowly. "Tom says he left a confession. Knew Royce planted that evidence, took bribes to ensure the conviction. Lived with the guilt these 3 years. Celia moved to him, touching his arm gently. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know. Angry he didn't speak up then. Glad he finally did. Mostly just tired of it all." He pulled her close. "That life feels like something I dreamed. This is what's real." "Speaking of real." She took his hand, placed it on her belly. "I have news of my own." He went very still, understanding dawning in his eyes. Are we?" "Late winter. The doctor thinks. February, maybe March." The joy that crossed his face was like sunrise after a long night. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the small kitchen until she laughed and protested about the bread. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Our baby," she confirmed. "Are you happy?" "Happy." He set her down gently, cupping her face in his hands. "Celia, I don't have words. After everything, to have this chance. We both get a chance," she reminded him. "To do things right, to build the family we always wanted." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson. The horses grazed in the pasture Colt had fenced, and somewhere a meadowlark sang its evening song. It was peaceful in a way Colt had never thought to find again. "I want to tell you something," Celia said quietly. "About that night, the night you took me." He tensed slightly. They'd avoided talking about those first days, the kidnapping that had brought them together. "You don't have to." "I want to." She took his hand. "I was terrified. Yes, but also relieved. Isn't that strange? I was riding to my doom with Royce, and I knew it. When you appeared in that room, for one wild moment I thought you were there to save me. I wasn't. I was there for revenge. I know, but God works in mysterious ways. You did save me, just not how either of us expected." "You saved me too," he admitted. "From becoming something monstrous. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't shown me another way. But I was there. We were both exactly where we needed to be." A rider appeared on the trail below, moving steady toward their house. Colt's hand moved to his gun, old instincts dying hard. "Easy," Celia said. "It's just Samuel Curtis. I recognize that gray horse." Indeed, the federal marshal rode up looking travel-worn but pleased. They welcomed him with coffee and fresh bread, settling on the porch as stars began to appear. "You've done well for yourself," Curtis observed, taking in the tidy house, the prosperous look of the small ranch. "We've been blessed," Celia said simply. I have news you might find interesting. We've been cleaning up the last of Trenton's organization. Found some things in his safe, including this." He pulled out a daguerreotype, handed it to Colt. It was Emma, maybe 16 years old, smiling at something beyond the camera. Colt's hands shook slightly as he held it. "Where did you?" "Apparently Trenton kept trophies, pictures of all his victims. We thought you should have this one." "Thank you," Colt managed, voice rough. Curtis stayed for dinner, regaling them with tales of bringing a law to the territories. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "There's a town about 50 miles south, growing fast with the silver boom. They need a sheriff, man with experience, who knows the law but hasn't been corrupted by it." He looked at Colt meaningfully. "Interested?" "No." Colt's answer was immediate. "But thank you." Curtis nodded like he'd expected as much. "Can't blame a man for trying. You two take care." After he left, Celia found Colt standing in what would be the baby's room, holding Emma's photograph. "She was beautiful," she said softly, inside and out. He set the picture carefully on the windowsill. "I think she'd be happy, seeing this, us, the baby coming." "I think so too." They stood together in the empty room, imagining it filled with a cradle, toys, the laughter of children. Outside, an owl called, and the horses nickered softly in response. "No regrets?" Celia asked, echoing her question from a year ago. "None. You? Only that we had to go through so much pain to get here. Maybe that's just life. Joy built on sorrow, love rising from ashes." He pulled her close. "Emma used to say the mountains were God's way of showing us how to endure, standing strong through every storm, but always reaching for heaven. Wise woman." She was. They moved through their evening routines, Colt checking the animals, Celia preparing for bed, both pausing often to touch, to smile, to marvel at the life they'd built. When they finally lay down, Celia curled against his side, her hand resting protective over their unborn child. "What should we name the baby?" she asked drowsily. "If it's a girl." "Emma," they said together. "And if it's a boy?" Colt considered. "Something new, something that's just ours." "I like that, a new start for a new life." Sleep was claiming her when Colt spoke again. "That day at the hanging tree, when Royce asked what you were to me, I said you weren't property, but I knew even then you were something more. What was I? My redemption, my future, my home." He kissed her hair. "Everything I never knew I needed." She made a soft sound of contentment, already drifting toward dreams. Colt lay awake a while longer, listening to her breathe, feeling the solid reality of their life together. Through the window, stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Once, that sound had meant loneliness. Now it just meant the world was vast and wild and full of possibility. Just like the love between a broken Marshal and the woman who'd taught him to live again. His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining, and he thought about the letter he'd write to Tom tomorrow, about the crops they'd plant come spring, the addition they'd build for the growing family, the horses he'd train for extra income, simple plans for a simple life, but rich in ways that mattered. The photograph of Emma watched from the windowsill, and Colt felt her presence like a benediction. She'd wanted him to live, really live, and finally, he was not in the shadow of revenge or grief, but in the full light of love and hope and tomorrow's promise. "Thank you," he whispered to the darkness, to memory, to the sister whose death had led him to life. Then he closed his eyes and slept, Celia warm beside him, their child growing beneath her heart, and peace settling over the little house like a blanket. Outside, the mountains stood eternal guard, and the stars sang their silent songs, and all was well in their corner of the world. In the morning there would be work and laughter and the thousand small miracles of an ordinary day. But for now, there was just this, two souls who'd found each other across impossible odds, building something beautiful from the ashes of pain. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for joining me on this wild journey through the Old West, where love bloomed in the most unexpected circumstances. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of frontier romance, redemption, and adventure. What did you think of Colt and Celia's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and love hearing from you all. Until next time, partners.